Hi, I'm Patricia Grabarek.
And I'm Katina Sawyer, and welcome to the Workr Beeing podcast.
So today is a Katina article, or one that you've read at least. Can you tell us a little tidbit about it before we get started?
Yeah, so today we're going to be talking about distress organizing, which is a fancy term for what happens when people work in jobs that are particularly upsetting or the context is particularly overwhelming from an emotional standpoint. And we're going to talk about what people, how people react to those. This is a qualitative study. So a little bit different from some of the studies that we usually talk about because it's based on observations and interviews. But we're going to talk about what are some of the pitfalls that people get into when they're in these kinds of jobs, and then what people can do to kind of get out of those.
Okay, well, if that feels really relevant, I mean, I feel like a lot of people are going through stress, distress in jobs right now.
Yes.
Obviously in and out of jobs too, depending on your situation. So feels very relevant to this time.
Yeah, that's why I was kind of attracted to the topic, because I felt like it was, particularly relevant to a lot of people who are like on the front lines right now and, trying to fight the crisis that's going on, but also I think that there are some good things that people can take away that do not, directly apply to this, but maybe have been overlooked in past periods of time because this kind of situation hasn't been so like front and center. People haven't been thinking about it as much. So I think it's broadly applicable, but also particularly applicable at this time period.
Interesting. Well, I can't wait to hear about that.
Yeah.
How are you doing right now?
I am doing fine. It is right now, as we're recording, it's almost the weekend. So I'm looking forward to actually starting to pack up some stuff. We got all of our boxes in the mail. It's
Yay, for the move.
I know, for the move. So it's so weird to get like a delivery of boxes. Like, what is this? It's a bunch of boxes. Like, how exciting. But it actually, I am really excited to like get going. We keep like stopping by the house every few days to see, just measure things and just check in, make sure like everything's okay there. And I think we'll be really happy to like be settled in or like get actually there. So we're moving in that direction, which is good.
That'll be great. I'm so excited for you.
Yeah, I'm pretty pumped about it too. It is such a weird time to be moving because it's like I'm so excited to move, but then like one of the reasons why we were excited to live in this place is because we want to be able to like walk to like the cute town and like all this stuff, and now we're like there's nowhere to go.
Nothing's open.
Yeah, I'm like, oh man, like we could really be moving anywhere right now and our experience would be pretty much the same.
Well, it'll just make it that much more exciting when all the stay-at-home orders are lifted. That's
true. That's very, very true. I completely agree. How are you guys doing?
Good. We're good. So yeah, weekend's almost here. We are doing a Zoom happy hour with friends, which we've talked about that so many times, but it's a different group of friends that we haven't done one with yet during this time. So that should be fun. It is kind of funny to like see the waves of who's available, who's thinking about doing happy hours with each other. It's like it's been going in interesting spurts. I don't know why I find it interesting, but I do.
Yeah,
like, these people are really good friends of ours too, but for whatever reason we never really thought about doing a happy hour with this group. But they all live kind of like what you were saying with your college friends, all live far away. Like they all live far away, and so we're used to not seeing each other as much, I think. And maybe that's why.
Yeah,
but it should be fun.
Yeah, absolutely. No, I think that it is nice to connect. And especially if it's folks that you haven't seen in a while that you normally would see, it's like you want to make sure that you're, still everybody's doing okay and you're still connecting, not like losing touch. And also if it's like people who, you usually don't talk to even outside of or don't have as much contact with outside of this, it's also nice to be like, oh, this is a reason for us to realize like we could be connecting.
Yeah, definitely. So I think it'll be good. But other than that, like this weekend, we don't have any crazy plans, as you can imagine.
Yeah.
So we'll see. I'm sure we'll find something to do. Danny really wants to play Risk which I've never played before.
What is that?
It's some board game.
Oh,
That's all. That's literally all I know. That's the
okay.
extent of my knowledge. Um, I don't know anything about it, but I don't know. I'm sure it'll be fun. And then we actually,
I guess.
so yeah, we'll see. I'm sure other people know what Risk is, and maybe it is fun. I don't know, but we'll see. And I'm going to tell you something silly. So I bought this game, and it is the most absurd game in the world, but I just really wanted to buy it because I think it's funny. It's called Throw Burrito.
What? Oh.
And I don't know anything. I haven't played it yet. We just opened the box because there's like these two like squishy. They're almost like those stress balls, but looks like a burrito. And there's two of them, and I don't know. There's like cards, and like you play something, and then you could throw burritos at each other. And I'm like, I really wanted to throw a burrito, and so I bought the game.
So you throw the burrito, like what? So what are the rules? Is it's not like hot potato, or you don't know?
I have no idea. I haven't read the rules. All I know is that the only thing I've seen was that you cannot throw both burritos at once. So, and you can't have both burritos in your hand. So I can't have a burrito and then catch one and then keep both of them. Oh. And I don't know what else, but it can be 2-player games. So like I basically get to throw burritos at Danny, and it'll be pretty fun.
So you bought a game that allows you to throw things at your husband.
Yep. That's exactly what I did.
That's so funny.
Yeah.
So how does he feel about this?
Well, he opened the box and was immediately obsessed with the weird burritos. He says that they feel fun, and I was like, I don't know what that means exactly, but they do like kind of have like a they feel like those stress balls. You just like kind of want to squish it.
Yeah,
I don't know.
I mean,
I think it'll be an adventure. We'll see. We'll see if we don't break things with these burritos, throwing them around the house. I don't know.
Oh my gosh.
We also played like a few weeks ago. We played. He's gonna be so upset. I'm not gonna do it justice, but a game that he and his friends made up when they were in college, and it's called couch volleyball. Mm-hmm. And you like stack up stuff in between you, and you have to both sit on the couch, and then you have to like basically play volleyball with a beach ball. But you're not allowed to like stand up. Like you have to keep your butt on the seat on the couch. So it's like a very stupid game. It's like such a bro like college game for sure.
It sounds fun though.
It is fun. He made me play it once, so we might play that again because I feel like we don't really have much going on this weekend. So maybe it's gonna be a couch volleyball and throwing burrito weekend.
Wow, I like how Danny's game that he picked is Risk, which sounds somewhat more, I don't know, substantial than a throwing burrito game.
Yeah, well, I picked the less intelligent game for sure. But
I mean, I actually like during time periods like this, I often will select activities or TV shows or things that like just require nothing thoughtful at all. Like I often will pick things that are just completely like out of the realm of having to have any cognition whatsoever.
I'm with you.
Yeah.
I'm totally with you. Because I think also like he's not working as much right now, and I'm working a lot still. Mm-hmm. And I think that's part of it too. It's like I feel like I've been working more, and I think that's partially because you and I have been doing some Workr Beeing stuff that maybe we ramped up some things maybe that we hadn't thought about before all of this happened. But I feel like I want to do something silly and like not have to think. Mm-hmm. And he's, I think, on the other end of the spectrum where he's like happy to think about things, and I'm just like, well, I'm gonna throw a burrito at you instead. So there you go.
Every time you try to think, I'm throwing a burrito at your head.
Yep.
Oh my gosh, that's really funny. Yeah, I mean, I've been noticing that too. Like Brendan really wanted to watch The Witcher, and like I honestly don't know if The Witcher under any circumstance like is something that I would choose to watch. I really don't know what it's about. Like, I don't know. Dragons something. I don't know if it's really about dragons. But it's like something like, you know, I like Game of Thrones. That's like the only dragon show I ever liked. But like, I don't like anything that occurs like in a world that doesn't belong to me. Like, I don't understand. Like, I don't like
Harry Potter.
Harry Potter's the
every
only
time
thing.
you say
I know.
that.
I know. Harry Potter's literally the only thing that I like that is not in my world. And I think that that's because it's non. If this makes sense, they're still like kids, and I can still like, it's a simple enough story that I can still be like, oh, okay. But like when it's complicated and it's also not in my world, and I have to pay a lot of attention to like follow what's happening, and I'm trying to make sense of stuff on top of making sense of stuff, I'm just like, this is like, I'm not into this. And also, like, I think the characters in Harry Potter were like really good. I mean, maybe they are in other things too. I don't know. But like, I just don't have like an interest in, or I'm not generally attracted to things like that. So he really wanted to watch it. And like for days, he's just been like, we should watch The Witcher. We should watch The Witcher. And I'm like, I cannot watch The Witcher. And I'm like, I'll watch like World's Most Extraordinary Homes. I'll watch a cooking championship. Like, I'll watch anything that I can just like literally like stare at and like not need to care about at all. But he watched The Witcher alone because he realized I was never
That's
never
funny.
going to come around on that.
Yeah, I feel you there too. I feel like I'm always like, let's watch something light. And he's like, let's watch Westworld. And I'm like, well, like, I like that show, but that's not very light. And I really
Right.
want it to be light right now. So
Yes.
next guess. And then there'll be something else that's really heavy. And I'm like, let's
Yes.
just watch Parks and Rec again or something.
Yeah,
I
I
don't
know. I actually really need to watch more Parks and Rec because I always want to watch it, but I haven't. I don't know. I just feel like now I'm like, or Funny Things. Like, I'll watch that, or Funny Things I also like, but like we're out of Funny Things. And Brendan won't let me buy the last season of Schitt's Creek. He says we have to wait for it to come out. I'm gonna buy it when he's not looking, and then I'll be like, too bad.
You should. I need to watch that too. But I'm telling you, I was telling you before we started recording, happy endings. You should watch it.
Yeah, I know. I really
It's
will
really
watch
good.
it. I know.
It's
I
very
liked it when
funny.
you showed it to me.
It's funny, it's light, and you don't have to think too much.
Yeah, that makes
So.
sense. That makes sense. I like funny and light, and that is the opposite of the article that I'm going to be talking about today.
Oh boy. So tell us about this article.
Yes. Okay. So this article is by Bill Kahn and, well, William Kahn. I'm calling him Bill because I've like been on symposiums and stuff with him before. And it's called Dynamics and Implications of Distress Organizing. And it was published in the Academy of Management Journal in 2019. And basically, this article, like I mentioned, so I guess it's worth mentioning that this article follows a little bit of a different methodology than a lot of the articles that we review, because it's not quantitative data. So it's based on 3 years of observations that he had at a child welfare agency, so like a social services agency that helped to care and protect children who are in basically foster care, and they work to like reunify families and facilitate adoptions and keep in touch with families that have adopted children, or they find children that are in unsafe situations and take them out of those situations and place them in foster care. And so it's a very emotional job that these individuals have. And so he collected data for 3 years, like documenting all kinds of stuff, group meetings and all kinds of documents from the organization. And he looked at like website materials and newspaper articles and all the information that he could find in the public domain. And he sat in the office and watched how things unfolded. And then he also interviewed 85 members of the agency over the course of that period of time, asking them all different kinds of questions about their experiences, and specifically asking about what are things that happened that were distressing to them and their reactions to those distressing things. And then he tried to come up with sort of a model for how people react to and what are the general ways that people handle these distressing situations, and then what are the outcomes that are associated with those distressing situations that we could kind of learn from.
Interesting. Okay. I mean, wow, it sounds like he's really got in there very deep
Yes.
and understanding everything going on. So that's really cool.
Yes.
Sounds like an interesting methodology for sure.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
so what did they find? Like what did he experience and see that was worth noting and that we can learn from?
Yes. So basically, the article highlights that when individuals are in these really distressing circumstances, it and they're in these distressing circumstances that sort of have a constant level of distress. So I think like some ways that or some other contexts that this might apply would be like in hospital settings or healthcare related settings, or in nonprofit settings where you're dealing with clients, or if you're running like a homeless shelter, or people who are working in conditions where there's sort of this chronic emotional burden that goes on, where they're like routinely exposed to painful things. That what actually ends up happening is that people develop and sort of reinforce defense mechanisms that cause them to sort of like collectively try to avoid experiencing distress. And so what ends up happening is that people think that these distressing experiences, because they do feel so negative, that they want to avoid even engaging with them. So instead of acknowledging them and trying to grapple with them head on, they try to sort of put up barriers and walls to push themselves further away from the distress. And so their way of sort of coping with it is by creating this like disengagement with what's going on that's distressing and removing themselves from it, which sort of creates like a culture basically where people don't recognize the severity of what they're dealing with from a psychological perspective. Um, and so they're sort of creating these like actions or behaviors as a group that allow them to create this wall between themselves and what's going on, and also between each other and how each other are feeling in those circumstances, as a way to sort of protect themselves from those emotions. But what he found was that while it seemed logical to them that if they were going to cope with this ongoing stress and distress by creating these walls between themselves and their clients, or themselves and their coworkers who were experiencing something painful, that actually ended up amplifying the distress that they were experiencing. So it doesn't end up being a good way of coping, to sort of remove yourself and say, this is work and this is what I need to do to get my job done, but I'm not going to let myself get sucked into the emotions of this situation. Over time, the avoidance of that distressing emotion actually makes things worse.
That's super interesting, and I'm just kind of thinking through it all. I mean, it makes sense to me at the same time, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like you think about if you avoid dealing with like grief, you can imagine the types of impacts that has on people, right? People talk about that stuff all the time. Like you have to cope with it, you have to deal with it to be able to move past it. So if you're just avoiding it constantly and it's constantly coming at you, at some point your wall is not strong enough to keep it out, I guess.
Yeah. Yeah, and interestingly enough, what he found in this study was that um while people sort of purported that they felt that this was self-protective, that it protected like their I can still have like thoughts and feelings and actions that are my own, and I'm not just like totally sucked into what's going on around me, that it was sort of unconscious that they were all sort of also um ignoring each other's emotional needs. So it was like this individual focus on I'm gonna protect myself also led to like almost this like callousness towards others, where people
Oof.
were like unwilling to engage in emotional conversations or like acknowledge or give credit to other people's painful experiences, because it was like, well, if they're going to get sucked into that, that's fine. Or if I perceive them as getting sucked into that, that's fine. But like, I'm not going to let myself get sucked in because that's going to be unhealthy for me. And so it ended up basically creating this like culture within the organization where people were very disengaged with each other and they were very dispassionate. Like there was this narrative of like, you know, everybody has a job and our job happens to be upsetting, but that doesn't mean that it's not a job and that we can't just like come in and sort of get things done, not, almost like in a more robotic fashion, right?
Wow.
That they sort of felt like the way that they had created this culture was like, the only way for us to get this done is to operate in a very dispassionate way, or else we're going to get so sucked into this that we'll lose all sense of like our sanity, basically. So that was sort of the culture that was being produced. And in the article, they talk about some different ways that that showed up within the organization. So there were these like avoidance mechanisms of like avoiding time or space for people in the organization to actually examine or experience the emotions. And then there were also these interpersonal avoidance patterns where when other people were going through or visibly going through a hard time, people were getting out of their way instead of approaching them. And so there was like this general sense, like I'm saying, that these emotions were not going to be recognized even though when they were right in front of people. And so he talks about these like three kind of, or these like few ways that people sort of reinforce that. And one way was this like what he's calling an intent task focus. So like people just talking about like, I've got a lot to do. I have a lot to think about. I have a pile of paperwork that I need to do. And amidst these circumstances, if I don't get this done, it's going to be late. It's going to look bad for our agency. And so I just don't have time to deal with the emotions that I'm feeling. So if we want to continue being successful in this organization and actually get things done, we need to prioritize tasks over emotions because otherwise we're going to fall behind. So that was one narrative that helped to sort of reinforce this idea, was like a time-based narrative.
That is sad. I'm
Yeah.
sorry. Everything you're saying is making me really upset too. I'm feeling distressed in this distress article.
Yes.
Because that just sounds so miserable. I mean, people are not supporting each other. People are not talking about it. Everyone's just avoiding it. And then I feel like these are the types of things that lead to like agencies like this one having issues where they're not catching problems and things that are more negative because everything's been kind of diluted almost with this weird approach to it. That's really sad. I'm sad to hear that this happened.
Yeah, and I think that this is actually pretty normal in distressing situations, that people come to conclude that the only way that they can be productive is to be rational and not emotional. And like this idea that emotions are like time sucks, that if you get emotional about something, it's a distractor or it's keeping you from doing what you actually need to be doing, which is getting your work done, and not recognizing that potentially part of what's going to help you be effective in your work in an ongoing manner is that you have to acknowledge the long game is that if you want to do this job for a long time, you're going to have to create ways that you effectively cope with this instead of just like tabling it.
Right. Right. I mean, it makes me think of even just the concept of emotional labor, which we talked about before, where emotions are part of your job. And in this case, like, that's true. Maybe not showing them all the time is part of your job, but you're dealing with emotions, right? Mm-hmm. So it's not emotional labor in that same exact, well, it is, but it's not in the exact same way that I'm thinking about it. But it's more of the idea that people are trying to separate the emotions from their job, but emotions are part of the job, and that's okay. That happens. There's jobs where emotions are a part of it.
Yeah, definitely. And in this context, he was noticing. I mean, there are like horrible things that are written up in this article, like not to like make this more depressing than it needs to be, but he writes about how their meetings were like really short and to the point, even when they, like, almost in an odd way, even when something really horrible was happening, it was like, what happened? Did you call this person? What resource did you engage? What do we need to do next? Like, all the questions were very process focused, task focused, even when what they were dealing with was really horrible. So he tells this story about that a social worker was having trouble with this family who had their kids taken away from them on multiple occasions. And during this occasion, when they went to check on the house, they found a newborn hidden behind a boiler in a basement.
Oh
And
my
like it
gosh.
was unclear how long the baby had been there for. Like the baby was like not being taken care of in any way. And in that meeting, they basically were just like, okay, so where did you find the baby? What did you do? What, and like, so he kind of details how even in these situations, nobody was taking time to recognize, like even saying like, that's so horrible. Like, I can't believe that happened. It was just like, our job is to address the situation and not get sucked
Mm-hmm.
into the emotional aspect of it. Because if we do that every time, all we'll do is end up emoting. But then it created this strange culture where like they never gave credence to it. And
Yeah.
so it was like, this is obviously a really traumatic thing. And like nobody's even calling any attention to that. Um,
Hmm.
yeah. And then
Well,
oh, go ahead.
I was going to say, just like, well, to the point that you're making, like, you know, you're saying, oh, it's horrible. You can't believe that happened. Was the example you gave is something to say, but they probably can believe it happened. So I
Right.
think that there's something to be said there too. It's like there's so much that they're seeing that the average person is not seeing all the time.
Right.
And so even their typical response to it would be different than ours. But ignoring it is not going to help, right? Like
Yeah.
I just don't know what that response would be. It probably would be some sadness, and it probably would be less extreme of a response than us, just because over time people get desensitized, and that's fair. That happens. That's fine. But I think perpetuating this culture of where you're constantly hiding or ignoring the emotions, just putting it aside, that's a whole other can of worms.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think, I mean, just in some of this like compassion circle stuff that I've been doing with this hospital, like I'm hearing some of this come up. And so I'm finding it really interesting because I think you do get habituated to things and then they don't stand out as much, but then also it doesn't mean it's not impacting you. And you
Mm-hmm.
do feel like, well, I'm the person that has to put on the like brave face, right? Like this is part of my job. So that was another thing that he highlighted, was that they had these like narratives in the organization that helped them to justify these actions. So like one was like, our job is to save kids. And so our emotions don't matter. It doesn't matter how we feel. What matters is that we're doing our job and that we're giving the kids the highest priority. And so it's not about us being upset. Like we took on this job knowing that there would be psychological costs. And so now we have these psychological costs and basically like, and there's nothing we can do about them. So there was sort of like this,
Mm-hmm.
like, this is what we signed up for, but not like thinking like, but is there a way that we could improve it? Right. Um, and then they also talked a lot about like being tough, that it takes a specific kind of person to do this job. And I'm that kind of person. So almost this like persona of like, the reason that I got into this is because I'm a person who's able to handle this. And so these this is me admitting that I'm having emotions about it makes me run the risk to think maybe I picked the wrong job or the wrong profession. You know, like there's like this like
Mm.
riskiness in recognizing that. And then the third part is just being so busy. And this idea that they are taking on a job that they know is extremely hectic, extremely stressful. So they sort of are accepting instead of trying to approach the fact that like this is a really stressful job and it's really highly emotional. But that doesn't mean that we can't give some credence to our emotions, and that there may be, even for people who are really great at this job, sometimes where you need support.
Yeah, that's so. I think it makes sense though. Everything that you've said in terms of what the article has talked about, like all those things as you're saying them, I'm like nodding my head. Yeah. I could see that. I could see why people would be scared to confront it and think maybe this isn't the right fit for me. Maybe I picked the wrong profession. Maybe I picked the wrong career. Like, I think about when I was picking my career and where I wanted to go. And, I was doing research studies with patients with chronic illnesses and late stage cancer and things like that. And it was really hard for me. And, I wasn't able to remove the emotion piece and decided not to go into that field because of it. So I could totally see why wanting to avoid that emotion, because you don't want to feel like, oh, maybe I have to change my career, because maybe deep down you know this is the right thing, even if you're dealing with these problems and issues and feeling this way.
Yeah. Yeah. And I did the same thing. I thought that I was going to, for a little while, I was thinking that maybe I would be a clinical psychologist. And then I decided that I didn't think that I would want to take on like that emotional burden all the time. And so, I made sort of a similar decision to like get myself out of the emotions realm. And then I ended up doing like a ton of research that's like really emotional and like sometimes hard to get through. So it's kind of been an interesting journey from that perspective. But like, yeah, I think that, when you make that decision, and I think it's true for doctors and nurses too, it's like when you make that decision, there's almost part of it that's like almost this like badge of honor idea that like I took on this responsibility. And so in order for me to be a true professional at this, I need to take on what I signed up for without complaining or showing that it bothers me,
Yeah, I can see that.
The other piece that I wanted to bring up is that they also avoided each other. So they either would like, if someone was showing emotion, they would like detach. So they would just like, there was a general culture of detachment that people like really didn't get below the surface with each other, but they would try to like encourage people, like if they were starting to show emotions, like, it's okay, you're fine, and like walk away. Like this like detachment from the fact that the emotion was occurring.
Wow.
They also would like deflect. So like avoid looking at distressing materials. So like if they had particularly distressing stuff, they would not mention, they would call things like the incident or the circumstances, like that they were trying to like sort of sugarcoat the things that were going on. And then also that they would like suppress information. So like ignoring people or silencing people. So they were basically like trying to, if something emotional came up, not only was the culture sort of supportive of distancing, but when things did come up, there was sort of this interpersonal reaction of like, oh, that's not appropriate.
Yeah. So that probably just makes it worse. That just continues to create the spiral effect, and you're not getting. We talk about the positive side of this, right? We talk about support from coworkers and peers and leaders, and how important that is to help you manage through the day and deal with stress and impacting your wellness and all those things. And they're like literally doing the opposite of all the things we always talk about.
Yeah. Yeah. So basically, all of this bad stuff he found led to employees reporting that they felt emotionally isolated, like disconnected from other people, which is not surprising, and really emotionally exhausted. So what they thought was making them less emotionally exhausted, like I'm not engaging with emotions, actually created a lot of emotional exhaustion in employees. Like in individual interviews, they were saying like, I feel more exhausted that I can't express this. And I know that like avoiding it is making me more burnout and more tired because I just haven't dealt anything. I haven't dealt with any of my own emotions. I've been pushing them off, and that's, I know, not healthy. That's not good for me. I feel isolated. I feel exhausted. So clearly it wasn't a good thing. And he counters this with what he calls momentary compassion, which was that every now and again he saw these like bright spots that would emerge that he then used as a way of showing them how things could be different. So in these bright spots of momentary compassion, he saw when agency members sort of broke with the norms and instead of ignoring it, decided to notice or empathize with people or try to alleviate like the suffering of their coworkers. And when that happened, it seemed to, that breaking of the norm, breaking through that fabric of what they had put in place as what the usual was seemed to provide this real like relief and release for people that appeared very positive for the group. And people reported feeling positively after they experienced these breaks in momentary compassion. So it happened more frequently when like somebody was working with a coworker that they were like personally friends with, or when someone was identified with another person or identified with the case very strongly, or when they had some sort of like principal reason that they thought that they needed to step in. Like, this is just so bad on a principle level. Like, you would be a heartless person not to step in under these circumstances. But when he saw that happening, that sort of created a rift in the fabric, and it shifted things and deepened relationships between people. People remembered those rifts in those relationships, and they enabled people to feel much more emotionally connected rather than isolated. So they say things like, before I felt alone, but when that happened, I realized I wasn't alone. The others have always been right there, and I didn't feel by myself so much. I wasn't so alone with how sad I was. It was a release, that to know that someone wouldn't just let me have to be alone with how scared I was. So these moments where people broke with the norms and provided support for each other actually alleviated that emotional exhaustion and allowed people to sort of relieve some of that burnout that they were feeling.
So it sounds like kind of everything that we've been hinting at as we've been talking is that the original cultural approach that they were taking is not the most healthy, most beneficial. And that when they did do the types of things that we would normally recommend, it seemed to be better. And this actually, one of the comments you made earlier really did align with emotional labor in the sense that, hiding your emotions. Like when we talked about emotional labor, we, if you want to go back to previous episodes with Dr. Alicia Grandy is one of the areas where we talked about this. But really what you're doing when you're doing emotional labor is you're somehow either having to project an emotion or hide an emotion and it's part of your job. And they've created that as part of the job unnecessarily. And so then now everyone feels like they have to hide their emotions. And that's really hard when sometimes you just need to break down. But then when they do break down, it's a good thing. So it's kind of like it's a weird dynamic. So did they, from everything here, did they talk at all about like what they learned, and did they adapt or change anything?
So he didn't talk about what they learned or how they adapted, because he wasn't doing like any kind of intervention, but was just like observing. But what the takeaway, I think the main takeaway is that the common sense model, I think, in a lot of these organizations where people are ongoingly experiencing distress is, I need to protect myself by not experiencing these emotions. Like, I need to protect myself by becoming sort of like a brick wall, and all the things around me are sort of bouncing off, or I would imagine them bouncing off. And if I see someone else who's not able to do that, if I get sucked into that person's emotions, it'll be completely untenable for me. Like, I think the fear is that people are going to get sucked into their jobs and just be like crying all day, upset all day, etc. And what's actually happening is, in that process, is that you're still taking on all those emotions. They're still sitting inside of you, but you are not coping with them appropriately, and people feel like so unsupported. And so there are these, in your mind, you think that you can create this barrier between yourself and the emotional experiences, but what's really happening is it's impossible to do that. So you are actually absorbing those those experiences emotionally, and you're getting burnt out and more exhausted because you're thinking that you can operate in a way that you're not absorbing them, but that's impossible. So I think the takeaway is, like, if you're in a job like this, especially during this period of time where things are so heightened in terms of stress, you need to take time to show that compassion. You can't just be task focused all the time. And it's not a sign of weakness to show that support for others, or to recognize that you're having these really complicated emotions. That actually helps you to do a better job, to stay in the job longer, and to build those relationships that you need to get through hard times, as opposed to sort of what I think is like a commonplace misconception that the more you can not react, the better a professional you are. Actually, the more you can give credence to and learn how to cope with those emotions and show support to others, the better things will be.
Yeah. I mean, that makes a lot of sense from everything that we've seen in the literature and the research, and it's just a very extreme example. We know that being supportive of others, being able to be authentic, be yourself, express yourself, those things are all really important for reducing burnout and exhaustion and stress and being more effective at work. So really, it seems like people need training in these types of professions where it's super distressing on how to do that effectively and how to work through their emotions so that they can see those benefits and help each other, support each other, and understand that it's not going to be what's bogging you down. What's holding you back is actually the fact that you're running away and trying to hide from emotions that you're still feeling, even if you're trying to choose not to.
Yeah. Yeah. I think that's a perfect way of saying it. And I think it's relevant. The reason it stood out to me is because, like I mentioned, I've been hearing some of this with the hospital workers that I've been talking to, that like you feel like you need to like put on this brave face and envision like yourself, like all this stuff's happening around you and you're this like warrior that has no emotions, that's like coming in to save the day, and your own emotions don't matter. And actually that makes you worse off in the long term. So you can still be brave and have emotions and recognize those emotions. So I think that's kind of the main takeaway.
Well, thank you so much for sharing that. I think it's really interesting. And, personally here, I'm just sitting here thinking like, why did we start these things? Like, why do humans try to avoid their emotions so much? Like, this is one setting, but I feel like we do it a lot.
Yeah.
And hopefully somebody listening can take this and think, oh, okay, like I can address my emotions head on and figure out ways to handle it and cope with it. And, obviously if they're very extreme, you get a mental health professional to help you. It's okay to have these negative emotions and have negative reactions to life and everything around you. It's just figuring out the best way to manage it and cope with it, and then moving past it and supporting others and, acknowledging what's going on within your own brain and not trying to ignore it, because you won't actually be ignoring it.
Totally. I completely agree. I think that's very well said.
Well, thank you so much for sharing this. Really appreciate it, even though it was kind of sad and I feel a little sad. I'm acknowledging that I feel a little sad.
Yeah, good
and
for you.
I know I have your support. So
you do.
So I'll be fine.
Awesome. Well, thank you for listening. And I'm glad that we were able to hopefully provide some information that's relevant to people right now.
Yes. So we'd love to hear from you too. If you have any comments, feedback, or thoughts about this, you can email us at contact@workrbeeing.com. You can find us on our website, workrbeeing.com. You can connect with us on social, on LinkedIn, Instagram, Facebook, and Twitter at Workr Beeing. And final plug, we launched a class on managing stress in uncertain times, pretty relevant to this article, actually. So if you are interested at all, you can go to our website and click on the courses button and it'll take you straight there. So it's a free class, so go and enjoy. Thanks for listening. The Workr Beeing podcast is hosted by us, Patricia Grabarek
and Katina Sawyer, and produced by Allie Johnson.